This morning I am in Columbus, Ohio, talking with Sarah Sampson, who is a senior lecturer and assistant dean for information services and the law library director at the College of Law of the Ohio State University. You know, I had occasion to visit this facility before your time, about 30 years ago, when it was new and we were looking at a new building in my own place. And I remember at the time seeing all this open space, and you still have some of it.
Yes, we still have almost all of our space.
And being incredibly jealous.
Yes, no, it is a very, very nice space, even though it hasn't changed much in the 30 years it's been here. It's still very well used.
Well, Sarah, as our custom, I'd like to ask a little bit about you as an individual, you know, a human being. Could you tell us a little bit about your life,
Sure.
perhaps not only now, but perhaps when you were younger?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Lima, Ohio, which is about 2.5 hours northwest of here. People may have heard of it because it's the setting for the television show Glee. And so people may have heard of Lima. It's a smallish town. I was raised in a family, there were 4 girls and I'm the oldest. My father was one of the first people in his family to go to college. He went to here at Ohio State on the GI Bill. He had served in Vietnam. And my mother was a homemaker for most of my life. And then once all of us kids were in school, she started working as well. And I lived in Lima up until I went to college. There were 4 daughters, and I currently have 2 sisters who both have 3 children, and I really enjoy spending time with them as well.
It's nice to have nephews, nieces, or
Really
in my
is.
case, grandchildren.
Absolutely.
You can go and
Yes.
spoil the heck out of them during
Yes.
visits and dump them on their parents.
Absolutely. It's nice to be able to do things that are fun, and then when things get not so fun, you can pass them back to their parents.
Well, sort of to follow up on you as a person, do you have any hobbies or any special passions that you
Yeah.
occupy time with other than visiting
Yeah, so
family?
I do try to spend time with my nieces and nephews and my parents here in town. And I also really enjoy hiking and walking. That's something that my parents and I do every Saturday. We go out and explore different metro parks here in the Columbus area. So I've been to lots of them and do that. And then do that during the week as well. I also really enjoy murder mysteries. So that's something that I've enjoyed my entire life. I've always been a fairly voracious reader, and when I was a child, I made it through all of the books that I was interested in the children's section of the library. And then my mother convinced the librarian to give me an adult library card. She didn't want to do that. She felt I was too young for that. And one of the first things I went for...
Protecting you from
Absolutely.
the harm of the stuff in her own collection. This
absolutely.
is terrible.
Yes, which as I learned later in library school was probably not the correct librarian
It wouldn't
way.
be what Mr. Dewey would like.
No,
although
no.
maybe in his era it would be.
Perhaps. But the very first thing that I went for were Agatha Christie mysteries and read all of those. And so that's something that I continue to read and watch on television as well.
You know, it's interesting. Agatha Christie's pretty tame by today's standards.
Yes.
But my parents used to just love her works, and they'd read them incessantly, and it was great.
Yeah, no, it's very entertaining.
Yeah. Well, can we sort of start to change the focus
Sure.
to more of your academic background? You've already alluded to the fact that you did go to college, but you have 3 degrees.
Yes.
Can you tell us what they are and where
Sure.
you got each?
So I have a Bachelor's of Science from Ohio State, graduated with a major in psychology, and then I went almost directly to law school, again at Ohio State. I liked being here in Ohio, liked Columbus, and really,
It's a nice school.
really
well,
enjoyed it.
Well regarded, too.
Yes, especially by me, I really enjoy it. And so I went here for law school, and then later in life, when I decided to become a librarian, I went to Kent State University, which has a...
Not too terribly far.
No, not far, and actually was not far at all because they have a program then and still have a program to this day here in Columbus
Well, that's most convenient.
Absolutely.
They came to you.
Absolutely.
Of course
And
you had to
so
go.
the program at that point in time was actually on the campus of Ohio State, kind of out on West Campus. Now it's at the State Library, but it was really nice. And the program here is actually bigger than the program in Kent, the library program. But they have they have full-time professors here, and so it's almost like a little branch campus, but just for library school.
Oh, that's all very interesting. So you sort of were a stay-at-home type in terms of
Yeah.
college. Nothing wrong with that. I
No.
was too, actually. I did all my college in the same city where I
Yeah.
lived. This is a nice campus. I had a chance to drive around a little bit before I came in here to your building and office, and it's really very spacious, open areas, a lot of students running around, look
It
very
is.
nice.
It's a nice combination between a traditional, what you think of as college, in terms of having, a discrete area where just students are, but it's kind of nestled in a big city too, so it's
Yeah.
nice.
Another thing that I found useful was that my GPS actually found the
Yes.
on-campus addresses. Sometimes I go crazy because it doesn't work on campuses.
Yeah.
And there was a nice parking garage right where you said there
Yeah,
was
there's
one.
plenty of parking, which is a big
And there were
change.
plenty of spaces open, so
Yeah.
I had no problem at all, which is another problem often on college campuses.
Yeah.
Oh, well. I noticed in preparing for today's conversation that following your completion of your law school degree, you worked for about 5 years as a judicial law clerk for the Ohio 4th District Court of Appeals.
Mhm.
Could you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
how did that work and some of what you did in it?
Yeah, so after I graduated and took the bar, I started working down in Circleville, which is, I'm going to say about 20 or 30 miles south of Columbus, for a judge, William Harsha, who's still on the bench. And this is an appellate court that, of course, sits on 3 judge panels for cases. And each judge, there are 4 judges, has several law clerks. I was able to continue living here in Columbus and commute down there for work, and then worked at home for part of the time. And then after that, I went and worked for another judge who is retired, Roger Klein, in Chillicothe and Circleville. And what we did there, I really enjoyed it, and it was a good fit for someone who, had the interest that generally then leads you on to librarianship, in that we would get case files, like back then they were all paper with all the transcripts and briefs and
Well,
everything.
it wasn't.
Exactly, everything was in paper. And we would get a case file. The other clerk and I would sort of rotate and just take cases as they came in. And we would draft an opinion, which is not at all how I thought things worked when I was in law school.
You figured the judge did all
Yeah,
that.
did all of it.
Naive
And-
as law students
Yes,
are.
yes. And we, for the one judge I worked for, we worked directly with the judge, kind of drafted back and forth with the judge. And the other judge, we drafted back and forth with the other clerk, and then it went to the judge. So it was slightly different processes, but I think both produced, well-reasoned, good opinions that were well-supported.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to really hone my writing skills, and that's probably where I really became an expert researcher.
It was sort of one-on-one with the faculty member.
Absolutely,
type thing.
yes.
In this case, the judge.
Yeah.
It's
And
an
it-
experience you don't generally get in law
No,
school.
you don't. And at some point, my co-clerk and I rediscovered the topic and key number system, the digest system, because that was an era where when I first started, we had Lexis and Westlaw online, but we didn't have the internet. So we didn't have email or anything like that. It was the dial-up.
So you all
Stuff.
called in, and then you'd sit there and wait and wait and
Yes.
wait, and then it would start to load a page,
Yes.
and it would start at the top of the screen. Or were you beyond that stage? They did speed it up.
A little bit. It was pretty fast, but we were really enamored with the searching. That was how we thought we should find everything. But
Law students, once the computers came in,
Yeah.
they figured, it's got to be all I need to
you
know.
just type words in a box, and something magic happens, and you're good. But we discovered that it's not, and we discovered the topic and key number system and became better researchers. And so I think that's where I draw on a lot of my, what I discovered there and when I'm teaching.
Well, I came along, of course, before the era of the digital media, and When we got Lexus for the first time in my library, the dean would have a visitor to the law school. He'd come bring him to the library to show him
Yep.
this new gadget we had,
Yeah.
this toy. And of course, he'd want his library director to do the demo.
Right,
And
because
I
it's
was
not easy.
Terrified I wouldn't know how to do it. But I finally figured out if I typed the dean's name in, all his articles and stuff would come up.
Ah.
And that saved me. That
That's
was
smart.
always the one I used after that.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah. Well, you worked with the courts,
Mhm.
the judges, for about 5 years, and then you decided to become a librarian or a law librarian.
Mm-hmm.
Going to ask you a little bit about how you sort of went through that process,
Sure.
and more particularly, was there anybody who played a role of some sort?
Sure. So, I like to joke that Sally Mae played a big role because I had a lot of
lone
student
place,
loans.
huh?
Yes. I put myself through school. My parents were very supportive and did everything they could, but I really, took on a lot of student loans and worked a lot. I actually was a waitress all through college.
Well,
Actually, through a little bit of
that's
law
a tough
school.
way to earn a living.
Yeah, it is. It was fun though. But when I was working for the judge, one of the things I decided to do was get a part-time job so that I could pay more on my student loans, or maybe even just have some fun, have some spending money.
Sure.
So I saw an ad in the Columbus Dispatch for a weekend reference librarian at Capitol, which is the
Okay.
other law school here in Columbus.
That's right.
And they wanted a librarian to work on Saturdays. And it actually paid pretty decently.
Something about the American Bar Association
Yes.
accreditation people
Yep.
were leaning on them, no doubt.
Absolutely, to have service for their evening program.
Yeah.
And it looked interesting. I like to research. They were not requiring an MLS. They were looking for someone with a JD, and they would train that person. And I took that job as a part-time job the same year that I came back and started being an adjunct here at Ohio State and teaching writing.
Uh-huh.
So I did both of those things. And
You must have had something with Sally Mae. You wanted to pay
Yes.
down those loans.
well, I will admit to you that I am also a bit of a workaholic. Have trouble with that work-life balance thing. I like to work. So I started working for Jackie Orlando, who is the director now at Capitol, and she basically sat with me for several weeks and taught me how to do a reference interview, what the boundaries were, really taught me the basics of how to be a librarian one-on-one. And I did that for about 2 years, and she kept trying to get me to go to library school, and I was still somewhat in that shock of being done with law school, had no interest in it.
Last thing in the world
just
you
like,
wanted
no,
was back
no,
inside a
no.
classroom
Nope.
other than up front being paid to be there.
Absolutely, yes. So, and actually, I was invited to apply for a position here at Ohio State once by Carol Hinchcliffe, and was not ready either to go to library school or think about doing it full time. And at some point, it dawned on me that the work that I was doing as an adjunct instructor and the work that I was doing at the library were what I really should be doing. Teaching, working with people one-on-one, and so I took the plunge and went to library school. I took one class over a summer and,
Sort
to
of
try it out.
See how it was.
Exactly,
yeah.
to see if I could figure out how to do it. And I really enjoyed it. And then I figured a good way to pay for it would be I took on a weekend job at the Ronald McDonald House here in town,
All right.
which is a house that families whose children are staying at Children's Hospital can stay in at a reduced price.
Yeah.
And I took on a job working there from Friday night until Monday morning. I slept there and worked one weekend a month, and that paid my library school tuition, and I continued to work full time. And then Ohio State came calling again and asked me to apply for a position, and so I kept going through library school.
So you didn't have to go begging back to Sally
No,
Mae. You
I
had-
did not.
You had old Ronald McDonald to bail
Exactly.
you
Yes.
out.
Yes. So Jackie
Okay.
Orlando was the person who really convinced me that this would be I should go to library school and should be a librarian.
Well, you got credentialed
Mm-hmm.
with your extra, your third degree, or we sometimes call them double degree.
Yes,
to
yep.
sort of forget the baccalaureate
Yep,
degree, I guess, in that. And then you came here, your first position
Yes.
as a newly minted, should I say, real law
Yes.
librarian,
Yes.
was here at the law library
Mhm.
at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the work you did in that first job and
Sure.
maybe what you feel you accomplished?
So, when they hired me here, I was a reference librarian was my title, but I also really took on the specialty of electronic resources. So I did the library's website, even though I had never done anything with a website before. I was very honest about that in my interview, and they still hired me. So I had to learn about how to keep a website up to date, design web pages, run scripts, do all that kind of stuff. I also managed our relationship between Lexis and Westlaw and tried to learn as much as I could about every database. Did a lot of faculty research. That's something that is a long tradition here at Ohio State and still is. And started teaching again, teaching legal research. At that point in time, Ohio State taught legal research as sort of a separate one-credit class. I think my accomplishments probably were the normal accomplishments that a really excited reference librarian has. Supported a lot of faculty research, trained a lot of RAs, started some services. We did not have a document delivery service here for our faculty, and I helped create that. And just really became, sort of steeped in research and teaching. And then something unusual that I did was because I had the background of teaching legal writing before I became a librarian, they asked me to teach a legal writing class here. And so I started the tradition here at Ohio State of librarians being really involved in the teaching of the writing. Not the research part of writing, but the actual writing part.
That's become very prevalent in
Yes.
many law schools now.
Yes. I think Ohio State is the only law school that I know of, and I've asked a lot of people, where the librarians actually teach the whole course. So we're in the pool of people now who, I have 4 reference librarians and myself who teach the entire course, teach the writing, the research, and there are no other writing instructors or anyone else. So I think a lot of schools, we're embedded within a course with a legal writing instructor.
Yeah.
So I don't know that anybody else who quite does it that way. And I sometimes when
That's a pretty substantial workload
It
for
is.
all of you, but
And
it must be exciting to have that kind of contact with
it is
students,
exciting, and I think the students view us differently.
Well, you're part of the establishment in the right sense
Yes.
in their minds.
Absolutely. And occasionally I feel guilty because it is a lot of work for the librarians, and I feel like it's my fault sometimes, but
Well,
it's a good thing.
why not let them have the experience?
Yes.
It's good experience.
It is.
And then their jobs are a little more diverse in what they do.
Absolutely.
That ought to be challenging in its own right.
Yes.
Well, you sort of came up somewhat locally, but before we talk about where you went next, could I ask if during those early years, or even today, is anybody that you consider to be a mentor?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of them, a lot of people who I've relied on to provide me guidance and advice throughout the years. The first is Bruce Johnson, of course,
your
who
predecessor.
was my predecessor
I'm gonna
here.
get to talk to him in a few days.
Yes.
He's away today, but I'm coming back, and
Yeah, no, Bruce is
he'll
wonderful
be back.
and continues to be a wonderful support to me. When he heard that I might be wanting to go to library school, he encouraged me quite a bit.
Okay.
He also was my legal research instructor.
Uh-huh.
Another mentor would be Carol Henchcliffe, who was a longtime deputy here and is now a
Alright.
library director in Australia. She really, I watched her a lot and learned how to manage and be strategic. I would count Michelle Wu and Peggy Fry, who were both at Georgetown. Peggy Fry was a longtime administrative deputy there and great. She was also the interim director when Bob Oakley passed away. And again, she was a person that I watched and really learned from and go to for advice.
Yeah.
And Michelle is just a wonderful support to all library directors and helps us all
Oh,
negotiate.
she's sort of super person
She's
in
great.
our field right now.
Yes.
I look around and I hear all these things and what she's doing, and she's involved in this project.
Yes.
She's one of the other two that have done some of these
Yeah,
these
she's
sessions.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And she was really helpful to me at a time at Georgetown where I really enjoyed my work there, but I wanted something else and I couldn't figure out what that thing was. And she really helped me realize like when it was a good time to move on.
Yeah.
You know, I enjoyed my job and was doing well, but wanted more, and she helped me realize how to do that. And then I also have to mention Ann Kleinfelter, who was my director at UNC, who
Okay.
continues to be a mentor.
Mhm.
And I don't think I've left anybody out.
Well, if you have, we will not hold you accountable.
Yes,
But
yes.
it's nice to have those memories of working with the guidance of some of
It
these
is,
more
it is.
experienced
Yes.
folks. Yeah. Well, I said, well, we'll do this before we talk about where you went after
Yeah,
you left
yeah.
here the first time. Now the cat's out of the bag. It's Georgetown and D.C. Can you talk a little bit about that? You left. You went there in
Mm-hmm.
about 2006.
Yes. So I was thinking about whether or not I should kind of make a commitment to stay here in Columbus, you know, forever, or whether or not I should branch out. And I decided to apply for jobs, anything that came up that looked interesting. And because I, at that point in time, and still am a mobile person, I'm able to move. I don't have anything that's keeping me in one place. And so I decided to apply for the job at Georgetown. To be honest, I had absolutely no expectation that I would get an interview or be hired, and just went really intending to learn and put myself out there, and enjoyed the interview process and really enjoyed working there.
And suddenly you were offered the head of reference
Yes.
position at
Yes.
in Georgetown is a pretty sophisticated major place.
Absolutely.
In
And
all the right senses of that.
yes,
And D.C. is a fun city to be a law
absolutely.
librarian.
It really is.
Because you have colleagues like you wouldn't believe from a whole
Yes.
variety of types of libraries.
So at Georgetown, I think my experience here was a really good experience to prepare me to go to Georgetown. I had a really solid base, but I will tell you, you know, Georgetown at that point in time was a huge place. It's still pretty big. I think we were onboarding about 600 new students every year when you include LLMs and the JDs and the evening program. And the bulk of questions that we were asked at the reference desk, and then also the depth of the questions that we were asked, really made me a much better reference librarian, and then enabled me to make the librarians who we hired or who stayed there better reference librarians. You know, when you get asked really hard questions all the time, you can't help but learn.
Now, who were the people asking these? I assume some were students,
Yes.
but you have that every place. Some were faculty, but were there people from, say, the Capitol Hill? Or
So how we would
broader
get those kind of
community?
questions is that we had a large LLM class, and they were usually people who were experts in their field. The example that I usually use is I had a student make an appointment for a research consultation who wanted to talk about the rule of law in Afghanistan. And so I did what I could to prepare, and then I sat down with him and I started talking with him, and it turns out that he was a JAG lawyer who had been involved in establishing the rule of law in Afghanistan.
Oh.
And so, you know, that kind of ratchets up the level of research help, and also just the level of the
couldn't
question.
Just go to the old Martindale
No,
and Hubble set,
no,
pull the
no.
last volume out, and
No.
look Afghanistan up and
No.
see what it said. Huh? That didn't
No.
suffice.
And another question was, someone asked one day how they could get like a congressional findings that was in a session law, you know, that was in a bill. How could they work to make sure that that got in the code? You know, that wasn't part of the session law that gets left on the cutting room floor. That's still law,
Sure.
but isn't in the code. And we researched that question, and then it turns out it was one of the professors there who helped write the bill, you know, and worked through and lobbied and made sure that it passed. And so
And made sure the parts you wanted to see
Yes,
in the
were
final
in the code.
because a lot of people foolishly rely on the
Exactly.
code and assume that's it.
that's it. And also won't believe that, you know, there is law that's not in the code.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, having that for 5 years and having that level of expectation of expertise, as well as desire to, you know, everybody in DC, as you well know, is a type A crazy person who wants to really do well. And so it's it's a great environment to be in. And I feel like what I like to call myself is the infrastructure librarian. I like to do things that are not like shiny or, super interesting, but really, make us good, solid people. So like one of the projects that we worked on while I was there is getting our research guides under control. I joked that I made a spreadsheet of all of our research guides and you kind of figured out when the last time they were updated. And I kept finding new research guides that no one knew existed, that someone had created, and then they had gone off to do bigger and better things. And then
A lot of good people passed through Georgetown in
Absolutely.
the years I was in
Yes.
the area, and I'm sure they had a lot of talent when they were there.
Yes.
You're probably right.
Yes.
There were work products around
Yes.
for you to discover.
And so it was that I think was my accomplishment there, was making sure that processes and institutional knowledge and procedures were there so that when I did leave, everything would just continue to run smoothly. And that with everyone, so that it wasn't dependent on a particular person, because as you've mentioned, at Georgetown, it's such a great opportunity and you learn so much that many people use that as a springboard for other opportunities.
Yeah. It always is a traditional place, at least after Terry Martin came, who was Bob
Yeah.
Oakley's predecessor,
Yes.
and then under Bob as well as, of course, under Michelle.
Yes.
Now, you had a role as an adjunct professor while
Mm-hmm.
you were there, and I assume I already know what you probably taught, but would you like to tell us?
Sure. So actually, before I started teaching at Georgetown, I didn't teach right away, and I like to teach. So I put out feelers and ended up teaching at Catholic's library school and then Maryland's library school as well.
Okay.
But I taught at Georgetown, taught the legal research skills for practice class, which is a 1-credit class. And then they asked me to develop like a subject specialty legal research skills for practice. So I did one with sort of a business law flavor to it, and that was kind of fun. And then I ended up teaching a 2-credit advanced legal research class towards the end and really enjoyed that. Tried to make it more like less bibliographic, more skills and practice centered. And a class that I taught, which was a little bit different, was the school ended up really needing someone in a pinch to teach their Introduction to Scholarly Note Writing class, which is a class that lots of journal students take, and it kind of takes you through the process of choosing a note topic, doing your research, and writing. And Jen Locke-Davitt, who was the head of faculty services at the time, and I team taught that class. She was and is a fabulous researcher, and she taught the research part. And since I had experience in writing, I took my legal writing experience and kind of twisted it, tweaked it a little bit to make it academic legal writing. And we taught that class once together, and then I taught it myself as well.
Well, you were at Georgetown. Now, I think you've already mentioned that you came after Bob Oakley's
No, he
death,
actually
or
did
he was
hire
still
me.
there.
Yes.
Or he did hire
Yes.
you. So
Yes.
you had the opportunity to work at least for a while.
Just
with
a
Bob.
little bit. It wasn't very long. If I'm going to guess, I would say it was a year, maybe 2. And I think we didn't have a lot of contact because I was, to be honest, a little bit in awe of Bob. And
It's also a pretty good size.
It's a big place.
Library shop.
Yes,
Yeah, there's
yes.
a lot of people, and
Yes.
he was at one end of the spectrum, and you were
Absolutely, yes.
at another part.
Yes. And so when my Bob stories are limited, but one of them is that I've never been a super confident person in my abilities. And when I interviewed at Georgetown, he did the traditional director thing where they bring you into their office and shut the door and, ask you what you want to do with your life. And he asked me if I think what he was trying to do was figure out if I was on the director path or not. And I'll be honest and say that the job that I'm in right now was always my dream job, and everything that I did was so that if this job ever came open or a job like it ever came open, I would be prepared for it. But I never, ever thought that I could actually have it. It was a dream that I aspired to. Like, you might aspire
And
to be the
here you
president of the
are,
United States,
in
but here
the
I
dream
am.
job. Well,
Yes,
it does
yes,
happen
it
sometimes.
does. And Bob asked me if I had aspirations to be a director, and I said no. That I would really wanted to do management, really enjoyed being a reference librarian, and that maybe I might aspire to be a head of public services somewhere. And he just looked at me like I was an absolute crazy person and said, "Oh, that's not right. That you really have the bearing," and that's the word he used, which I'm not sure what that means, but I have the director bearing, and really gave me
He was
confidence.
pretty adept at picking talent, so I suspect he saw something, and how he described it may have
Right.
been a little bit fuzzy,
But
he had it, you spotted.
yeah, and so that gave me the confidence to think, oh, maybe I could do this. And then, he did give me some assignments during the time that I was there that we had a lot more one-on-one interaction with, and so that was nice. And I think even though I wasn't mentored by Bob, I was mentored by people that Bob mentored. So, it's like he set that all up and really, have the colleagues that we went through losing Bob so suddenly, because it was just so sudden and sad, not just for his family and for the library. We really share a close bond. And so he gave us that, even though, I don't think he would have wanted to.
Yeah. Well, as you say, Bob's death was quite rapid and from beginning to end, and he was not ill really.
No.
But he developed a post-operation infection, and they just couldn't stop
Right.
it in today's world of some of those bacteria
Yeah.
being immune from antibiotics.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Yeah, too bad. Well, you were at Georgetown until about 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And then you moved sort of south,
Yes.
but you stayed east to
Yes.
North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and
Yes.
you were the deputy director of the University of North Carolina Law Library. Can you tell me a little bit about that part of your career?
Sure. So again, I was really happy at Georgetown, but was wanting more, and Michelle helped me see that. And I applied for several positions, and finally found one that was a really good fit for me.
Yeah.
And again, people who had the head of reference job at Georgetown previously had gone on to be directors, but I just really didn't feel like I could do that. And so this job at UNC was perfect, because it basically was being a director, but having Anne there to run everything by. And she, really, it's like an apprenticeship, I think. And so while I was there, I was in charge of the day-to-day operations of the law library. And one of the unusual things about UNC at the time was that it was administratively separate from both the law school and from the university library. It really reported up directly to the provost. So we had to do our own budgeting, our own HR, our own IT, so we were like a little mini kingdom, I guess, our own thing.
Your own little university.
Yes. So it was very different, and the budgeting there was just very interesting. Anne and I have talked about this, and we don't know anyone that has quite the complicated budgeting structure that they have. And so it was a great place to learn all of that. And when I went there, I intended to stay. I bought a house and intended to stay forever, and was really happy at that position. It really helped me improve my management, my strategic thinking. I still, dabbled in being a reference librarian, because for a while we didn't have a public services, a head of public services, and so I stepped into that role for a while. The other thing that UNC offered me, that while I had taught library school classes before, I had never really, been in a library school, and UNC has a great...
They have an excellent library.
They really
school,
do.
yeah.
And they produce some really wonderful law librarians, through the joint degree. We had hired one of the first joint degree graduates at Georgetown. And so I really enjoyed having students who were law students, in my advanced legal research class, and then in the library school class. So I felt like I got to mentor students there. I feel like I've always tried to really hard to mentor librarians that have worked for me. But I got to mentor students, which was really fun there. And that was a hard thing to give up to come here.
Now, when you were at North Carolina, I assume you had the opportunity to meet Gassaway.
Oh, absolutely. Lolly
Gassaway.
Gassaway. Yeah, she again is a legend in our field, and
She really accomplished.
Yes.
She and I worked together for 3 years in our first out of library school jobs, both of us. We were at the University of Houston.
Yeah, and she is still very much involved, in UNC as a faculty member, and so I got to work with her in that capacity and learn from her library experience as well.
Well, I had the opportunity to do one of these sessions with her about 3 years ago, and I don't remember if it's in the session or it was outside, because we talked a lot too, we're old friends. But she just went on about all these people who had worked at one point or another with her or studied under her guidance or something, who went on to tremendous positions in the association.
UNC is one
She
of
was
those
so
places
proud
too that
of them.
has produced a lot of really great
Yeah.
librarians and law librarians.
And I think Lolly obviously had a
Yes.
big hand in
Absolutely.
a lot of that,
Yes.
as one would expect if you know
Yes.
her. Yeah, she's
Yes.
one of those people. Now, you taught there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about exactly that?
Sure.
Is it more of the same, or was it something different from?
No, it was advanced legal research. This time it was a 3-credit class, and what was different about it was that we really tried to, again, break away from the bibliographic style of teaching into the skills method. And now the ABA requires that students take a certain number of simulation courses. And UNC was ahead of that a little bit. And I can't think of what the name of it was like a practice type class that they expected students to take. And we saw an opportunity to get our advanced legal research courses to be classified under that model, and then they are now classified under the simulation model. And so along with a few other librarians there, we created some courses. Like there was a transactional legal research course that Tim Galena created. He had worked on Wall Street before he became a librarian, so he was very well positioned to create that course. And so we really tried to get away from here are the things that you should be using to research, and here are the things that you should be doing, is what we replaced it with, and had students really do a much higher level of research and analysis and writing. And it was a really great course. I had fun teaching it, and I really believe that when students left that course, they were incredible researchers in a way that I hadn't seen in like a 1 or a 2 credit course ever.
That sounds like a real success. I know our practicing bar colleagues have been after the academy for years to turn out people who are a little more turnkey
Yes.
lawyer and not in need of so much mentoring and training.
Yes.
And while they're being paid by these people in their
Absolutely.
offices. And
Yes.
sounds like this type of course is exactly
It's
the
very
kind
helpful.
of thing that would
Yeah.
work well with that. And it
Especially-
does sound like the ABA has finally listened to these
Yes.
folks too, a little
Yes.
bit.
I think it's really helpful when students are in their 3rd year that they have some kind of experience, so that that their knowledge doesn't go away before they actually go out and practice.
Well, now you've been here at Ohio State. Can we talk a little bit about
Sure.
that? Or are you still working on it enough and you don't want to say anything? Well, I
So I
don't want to
think-
say I'm being facetious.
Yeah. So I was really fortunate in coming here that there were no problems for me to solve when I came. Bruce left this library in great shape. And so,
Did he pay you to say that?
no, he did not.
Didn't?
In fact,
Well,
he'd
then it's
probably be
real.
embarrassed that I said that. And Ohio State, has a great physical library,
Yeah.
collections. We have wonderful people here. And so part of what I want to do is very much what I tried to do at Georgetown and UNC, is not screw anything up. But then also to think very strategically about, what we want to accomplish here. And one of my main accomplishments so far has been to transition this collection, like we did at UNC and previous to that at Georgetown. I joke that I may have canceled more print serials only because I've been at 3 libraries during the great print cancellation period.
You're an experienced
Yes.
person at this.
Yeah. No, I joked at Georgetown that I was going to start wearing like the Grim Reaper suit and the sickle and go around. And I have had that role.
Only when the sales reps come.
Exactly, yes. I have had that role. And so when I came here, we needed to find some money to help with creating scholarships for students. And so I think that's a great thing, to do. And so I think we were fortunate enough to have room in the library to do that. And so I did here exactly what I did at UNC, where I surveyed my colleagues about what they had canceled and, what repercussions there had been. And, heard what I heard at UNC is we canceled a lot. Yeah. And there were a few problems, but most of the problems that we anticipated did not come up. And so I, had a lot of meetings with our faculty, with our librarians to get them comfortable with this idea, and then we just started canceling. Yeah. And I may be one of the only librarians. I probably should have mentioned in the first part, I'm a very frugal person, and that comes through in collection development as well. I'm all about getting people what they need and a little bit of what they want. And they don't really need anymore a lot of the print serials. They may want them, and so we have kept some of them and have taken done this in phases. But I would say that's my big accomplishment so far, is getting the print serials under control so that we have money to do things, to buy things that people want, that help them with their research, not just are focused on the core collection.
Well, you have the advantage of so much space in the building. Yes. That you're certainly not driven by lack of space, which many of our colleagues, that's a big consideration.
Yes.
The books are just outgrowing the place, and the digital era came along as sort of a godsend to unload a few things.
And we're committed here to collecting. We collect monographs like mad. Yeah. We just really get a lot of things, and they get used a lot. We have statistics to show that they circulate to our patrons and across the state of Ohio.
That sort of thing is not as likely to work well in digital format, if it's ever even there.
People might want it to find the book, but not to read the whole book.
Yeah.
And I'm also committed to keeping things that a lot of my colleagues across the country are getting rid of. Like one of the things that I think somebody should be keeping, and since nobody else is keeping it, we're going to keep it as case books, so that and
most of us didn't collect many of those.
And so in 50 years, when someone wants to study how a particular subject was taught, the history of legal education, we'll have them. We haven't really bought them, but as our faculty have been retiring, I've been grabbing them, and putting them in our collection because we have space.
That's right. A lot of faculty used this thing 30 years ago, and it's still on the shelf someplace in their office. Yep. And then they retire.
Yeah, and some of the earlier editions are I don't think they're rare, but there aren't a lot of, out there in large numbers. Yeah. And so
they were sort of throwaways.
Exactly.
They were used for a short while, but in class settings, and then moved on to the newer edition, or a different author came along or something. And but libraries, many of us didn't collect case books, because they were not going to be used for research in a normal sense, and so we needed space and
for other things.
For other things. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I think that gives us a certain luxury. Like we still have our complete run of the CFRs that I think at some point we lent to Hein for them to digitize, but we're keeping them because we want to have that, and we do have the space to do that.
Yeah, well, that's quite a nice luxury. Yeah.
It is.
And these are things that are not in the storage, the salt mine storage that say Law Library Microform Consortium is putting a lot of what they digitalize or have filmed in the earlier process. They've kept the paper in case there was ever a need to have access to
like the apocalypse happens or something.
Yeah,
but
whatever.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're working here and doing interesting things, and you know, we'll just I sort of see this as an appropriate terminal place for people, but who knows what the
Who
future
knows,
holds? You might
right.
be off to some place again, but enjoy it while you've got it. It sounds like you have a great life here. You have family in the area, friends, I'm sure, in the
Yep.
area, lots of them, and nice environment, from all I can tell, just sort of passing through.
Yeah. No, I feel
as
very lucky to be here.
Good. Well, can we sort of, on that, focus maybe on some of your outside professional
Sure.
service? I know when you were in DC, you were the elected incoming president of the Law Librarian Society of Washington, DC. But you didn't serve as president.
Right, that's when I left to go
kind
to
of moved
UNC.
over here, and
Yep.
for some reason this is out of their territory or
Yes,
something.
yes.
Yes. And you have had other roles. You've been Secretary Treasurer of AELL's Academic Special Interest Section, and chair of several of AELL's committees over the years. Would you like to talk a little bit about that kind of
Sure.
work, and maybe not just, you know, if you're involved in other organizations?
Sure.
Feel free to mention some of that. And then I will ask, and I'll ask it now, you can respond
Sure.
accordingly, why you consider this worth spending time on. And I know it's not just because you want to work all the time and
Yeah.
you're looking for things. You can probably find those right here
Yes.
in the shop. But
Yeah. So I think I came to doing a lot of the volunteer work a little bit later than other people because I was still in library school for about the first year and a half of my career. So I wasn't looking for the, committee work. But I did, the first thing I did was I was on the faculty services roundtable for ALSIS, and then was put on the committee and eventually chaired it. And I really enjoyed that, partially for the work that it did, but more for the relationships and the networking that I developed through that committee. In fact, my co-chair is Michelle Christakis, who is no longer a law librarian. She works for OCLC. And when she comes to OCLC, we occasionally still have lunch. I saw her, I think, last week. So I think that to me was why I got involved in it, was to meet people. Mostly because, as you've mentioned, I did most of my education here in Ohio and did not have the cohort that someplace like University of Washington or even like UNC at library school people develop. So I wanted to meet other people in the profession. And then I didn't know this at the time, but I now know it, that if you volunteer to do something and you actually do it, you're a superstar. And so people want you to do more.
Oh,
Right?
how did you discover that?
By actually doing things.
Yeah,
And then
suddenly
also
you have all
yeah,
sorts of opportunities offered.
Yes. And I think because I was so naive, perhaps, I said yes to almost everything. And I have a tendency to get myself overcommitted. And I really enjoyed almost everything that I did for the association work, and got a lot out of it in terms of, again, like just watching other leaders. Sometimes you can learn from bad leaders more than you can from good leaders, right?
Well, that's often the case.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you do run into a few that are in that category too.
Yes. Really enjoyed that work, and think that most of it is important. There are some parts of it I think that, looking back, did we really accomplish anything? No. But, we did a little bit, and then the next year's committee did a little bit more. And so it builds on each other. I do like looking back, currently I'm involved in LIPA. I'm on their board, and have shifted some of my work to, someone suggested, I think it was Joan Howland, suggested that I should be on volunteer for an ABA site inspection team, and so I did that and had my first one last year, and I'm doing another one this spring.
Oh, well, they'll be delighted to have you
Yeah.
come along about every year or so.
Yep, and so I enjoyed that.
And it's wonderful. I enjoyed doing them over the years.
Yeah.
Everyone I've talked to has done them.
Yeah.
loves them. You get a chance to meet good
Yeah.
colleagues and steal all the good ideas.
And they're good
they have.
ideas, yeah.
Try
And then
them
you
out in your
also-
own place.
I really enjoyed being on the team and meeting the people who were on the team with me, so that was nice. And I think one of the things that I regret looking back is that I didn't write more.
Oh.
That I am a social person. You probably have realized I'm a talker. So
Well, that's all right, especially
it's
this
okay,
morning.
especially for this. I think the association work, I really enjoyed it, but I do think that one of the things that I see as a weakness in the law library field is that we have a very insular community in law librarianship, and there are some really important things that we need to be involved in. Like, that's why I joined LIPA, trying to think about how can we take this need to preserve legal information and maybe broaden who we're talking to. So I feel the need to write more and to encourage younger librarians to write more, because you're part of a scholarly conversation that is bigger than just law librarianship. I'm struck by, how we have really great programs at these, regional meetings where we talk to each other, but then once the meeting's over, that it sort of disappears. It's in the people who you talk to, but there's no record of it. And there is a place for that, but I also think sometimes, that kind of stuff, it would be great if it were written up so it would be part of the scholarly conversation. But I do think that association work is valuable. It's really valuable for our institution. One of the things that I get out of it is when I was at Georgetown, it was a great way to get to know lots of people who then you might end up working with and get to know them before the interview. So, it's almost like you're interviewing lots of people at once. And so I think that's helpful. But I do think that association work is very important, and there's some, there are some real challenges facing our profession and the legal profession that the associations can help with.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like you are into it and enjoying it and probably producing a lot of good things as a result
Hopefully.
for our profession generally.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned writing. You've not done a lot of that,
Right.
from what you said, but you aspire to do more?
Yeah, so I've actually co-authored 2 legal research textbooks, the Ohio one and the North Carolina one. I have, a couple pieces, more article-y kind of pieces, and I've written a bibliography for Virginia. I think I did that when I was at Georgetown. I've co-authored a lot, and I'm working, I think I have 4 or 5 projects going on right now, and have a couple pieces that have languished, and so I'm trying to motivate myself to write more.
Well, that sounds like a nice thing to aspire to do, and I'm sure there will be opportunities.
Yes, hopefully there will.
Yes. Now, it isn't always that I get to talk to a working librarian in today's, shall we say, as Frank Hodak puts it, very challenging
Yes,
environment.
Yeah.
With all the tremendous changes in the legal profession, and the academy as well supports it. It came about as around the time of the Great Recession of 2008. You've already alluded, maybe it was off camera, not during the on-camera part of this, but there have been reductions in the student size here at the law school. And that's, I suppose, relatively universal
Yeah, I
in
think
today's
so.
environment with law schools. And along, even with those of you who are publicly supported, being a state school, legislatures have had other uses for scarce tax resources.
Absolutely.
And at least one large group of legislatures would like to have fewer taxes being hauled away from the people that pay them, too.
Right.
So could I ask you a little bit about some of the challenges you see, or how you, as a working director, see some of the new challenges, and where you think things may be sort of moving over the next few years?
Sure. So I think that, libraries are affected by several big shifts in society, and law libraries in particular. I see the decreasing overall pool of students who want to come to law school. You see the great shift in the legal profession and what lawyers are doing, and how technology is going to impact that way of life and profession. I see libraries in general being affected by technology, which is not a new thing at all, but it is something that as technology continues to change rapidly, we have to continue to change. And I also see the change in the credentials and training of a lot of law librarians as another factor. So we have many more dual degreed librarians and kind of what they're expected to do within a law library. And I think all of those things together, could be so challenging that we might throw up our hands and say, oh no, what are we going to do? But I think for me, I look at all of that and see some opportunities. And again, I think, even at UNC where we had budget cut after budget cut, like 15% every year, and that's not a number that you can just, cancel some books and you're okay.
Unfortunately, that's
No.
true. You can't just
But
find that somewhere in the fluff of the book budget.
No, especially when it happens year after year,
Yeah.
that relentless cut. And I look at UNC even now and look at all the wonderful things they're doing, that I think that if you look at these things as an opportunity rather than as doom and gloom, that there are some bright spots for law libraries and for law library directors. I think this new kind of class of the sort of newer library directors, since there were, so many retirements and then so many new people coming in, I think that it's nice to, to have people who are sort of with you in the struggle. I think that's one of the really nice things about librarians is that we help each other. And I think that's unique in our profession, especially in the law school. I find that when we're facing something, I can always go to a library director and find somebody who's faced the same thing, or a librarian, not even a director, and get their insight on how things worked. And I think that makes us really valuable managers. And I think you see that more and more. Not that we're just not managing the law library, that skill, can be translated into other areas, and I think you see that in law firms as well. So I think there are lots of challenges that face law librarianship, and I know I've heard people say, that the glory days of the law library are behind us.
I've heard that too. Being that I was part of that, and
Yes.
I'm lucky, but it's
But
not
I actually
necessarily true.
I don't think that's true. I think it's really changed, and I think like one era of law libraries and law librarianships, I think the glory days of the law library collection are probably over because we no longer have the monopoly on the information that we used to have. Even like many law libraries didn't even have their books, classified and cataloged for a long time.
For a long time,
so
everybody knew they had the statutes and the codes and whatever else you didn't really need, so why bother to
So
do
really,
all this?
it was a monopoly, and now we don't have that. And so I think if you accept that and think about, okay, so that's, okay. What else do we have? And I think it's really like the focus is on service. And again, like people think that because everything's online, it's really easy to find things, and it's not. It's easy to find some things, but not everything or the right answer or in an efficient way. And some of that may be solved through technology that is being created, that might be created, in my professional life or might not be. But I do think that, as long as we're okay with letting go of the way things have been done, that we can find new ways to do things and continue to be relevant.
Well, I think you're probably absolutely right. It's interesting, there's sort of a wave of a lot of retirements and new people coming in. I was part of the beginning of the last of those big waves. A lot of law librarians who preceded me essentially began on or around the time of World War II. Especially right at the end, they would go on the GI Bill and get further degrees or get degrees, and then start looking for how I'm going to use this and make a living. And we had a lot of refugees from Europe who had fled the Nazis either before the war or perhaps came as refugees after the Second World War.
Mhm.
And a lot of those scholars, or legal scholars, gravitated to the law library field. And they were all sort of retiring by the time I came
Yeah.
along. And so there's a lot of us that, like your cohort, that kind of came in somewhat within a few years of each other.
Yeah.
Kind of grew up in the field
Yes,
together.
yes, yes. And I think
And it
that's
sounds
nice
like
to
it's
have
coming
that.
again. And,
Yes.
and there were changes because, you know, in the old days prior to us, the collections were relatively modest in
Mhm.
size and in scope. But then we started to bring in new sorts of things, including a lot of treatises.
Yeah.
And that required a bibliographic control, and we basically began to build in
Yeah.
all the procedures that are probably now being supplanted by new ways of
Right,
addressing
right.
the same needs with the new digital
Yeah.
stuff.
And that's why I think so both when I interviewed at UNC and when I interviewed here, people wanted to talk about the future of law libraries. And one of the things that I like to make sure that not just librarians know, but everybody knows is librarians are great at dealing with change.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at a profession that I don't think anybody has, you know, in their lifetime has been able to just keep things the same in recent memory in libraries. You know, you think about microfilm, the card catalog, computers, Lexis and Westlaw databases. You know, like there's just been a progression of change, and I think, you know, the stereotype of librarians as being these, you know, people afraid of computers or whatever is just so false, and that's why I really don't worry about us being able to handle this.
You know, it's interesting in looking at the scope and quality of the collections, now that it so much comprises of other than just books on the shelf in your own physical plant. The information we can provide is so vastly
Yes.
superior in quantity and
Absolutely.
and range, and everything's what was the case not too many years ago.
And I think too, we don't spend our time doing, like, dealing with the easy questions anymore. The questions that eventually come to us are much harder. I have no, you know, like data to back that up. That's just my sense.
Well, people can find it using
Right.
the finding aids in Westlaw, Lexis, some of the other things, or even Google.
Yeah.
They don't need us. Well,
Yeah.
why should they need us? They need us when they get
When that doesn't
beyond
work.
that, and
Yes.
that's where the
Yeah.
expertise
Yeah.
we have.
So the thing
comes.
that I remind our newest librarians of is Supreme Court decision days are so much different now than they used to be. You know, we used to not be able to get our hands on the actual opinion for a while. When I was a reference librarian here, one of our staff members had a friend who was an AP reporter and could get us onto the FTP site that the AP used to send opinions on. And so, you know, we were able to actually get the opinions to people faster than they were on Westlaw or Lexis. And, you know, even then there was a lag in Lexis and Westlaw. It took them, you know, a little bit of time to get things on. And now it's just they're tweeting these things. And so, you know, that was something that used to be hard and now is easy. So there are, you know, now we're dealing with data and doing all kinds of things that perhaps we wouldn't have done before, but there are plenty of things for us to do.
Maybe I shouldn't fess up to being quite this vintage, but I remember before any of the so-called fast services, the Supreme Court was way back in Washington, D.C. I was living
Right.
out in the other Washington, as we call
Uh-huh.
it, in D.C. And the Supreme Court would hand down major decisions, always on Monday morning. And our faculty and others wanted to read them, and they had to wait for,
Yep, until
we
they-
had a loose leaf service from Commerce Clearinghouse.
Was it the
CCH.
U.S. Law Week?
No, this was faster
Before
than that.
that?
It was
Okay.
especially, came by airmail.
Oh, wow.
And we got it about 3 days after the court handed down an opinion. So, you know, about Thursday, they could read the opinion. The only occasional opinion was so massive in importance that the New York Times, which had a West Coast edition, a later part of this, would print it in total. So they'd have
Wow.
it right away the next morning. But certainly nothing like today, and it was, you know, and it was a whole different era in terms of communication. Today's colleagues and especially the millennial generation has
Yeah.
no inkling.
No
that
idea.
It didn't know we had anything that, when we call it snail mail, it really was snail
Yeah.
mail. It's still,
Well, and it makes me wonder, like, what things will be like 25, 30 years from now. Like, how can it get any faster? But I don't know, maybe it will.
well, presumably it will. I mean,
Yeah.
computer memory, the experts say doubles about every 18 months, and the speed of the computer processors doubles about every 2 years. And it
Wow.
has since the very beginning. And these are not my figures, so I can't
Yeah.
defend them, but this is what I hear
It's
and
amazing.
read. Yeah. Well, we're probably somewhat nearing the end of today's conversation, Sarah, but it's customary to ask if there's anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up, and don't feel you have an
No, I don't
obligation,
think-
because not
no.
everybody does.
No, there is not. I feel like we have talked about everything.
Yeah, well, it's been a real pleasure, and I want to thank you, Sarah Sampson, for talking with me this morning for the oral history. And in thanking you, I'm thanking you not just on my own behalf. I am the fortunate one of the group doing these that has been able to come here and visit with you this morning.
Great.
But I want to thank you also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hudak, and of course Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the honor of putting together this history. Thank you for your time and effort and patience in putting up with me this morning
Yeah.
here in your office, which is a nice campus setting. And thank you.
You're welcome.